This presentation, we did it a couple of years ago. I want to do it again. I think it's very valuable. I added some more stuff. And I'm trying to kind of crystallize what are the general themes, the general ideas behind Jewish parenting. Parenting, it's people, when they become parents, they don't necessarily get training for it. You kind of go into it blind. And it's a very hard job. I think it's harder than most vocational jobs, right? Or, but people spend, 10 years becoming a physician and, 3 years becoming a lawyer. And how many years do we spend becoming parents? It's kind of we just,
9 months.
Yeah, and we're on our own, really.
50 years. 2 years.
And I think it's arguably a harder job than all of those because you're dealing with kids, and kids are very raw, and they change every 6 months. It's a different child and different challenges, and they behave in ways that really mystify us. And I think it's worthwhile to go to the Torah and see what kind of central themes the Torah has about parenting, because it's very valuable even for us today. So what I did is I took core ideas of parenting and I tried to distill it to 10 central lessons, I think, that really encapsulate what the Torah says about parenting. So I want to start here, 10 Commandments of Parenting. I think the first one maybe is a little bit surprising because it's so obvious, but I don't think it really is so obvious, and that is thou shalt parent. It's interesting that when an animal's born, it's good to go. Like the relationship that it has with the parent, and maybe for a little bit the parent gets some food for it, but that's really it. There's an entirely different relationship that we have with children. Children are, they can't be on their own until they're for 20 years, really, and some even beyond, right? That people living in their parents' basement. All the millennials live in the parents' basement. So it's interesting that the Almighty kind of designed it that animals, they're born, they're really on their own right away. All of them, they could at least move around and mobile. And our kids spend, a couple of months certainly before they're even self-aware and able to move around and fend for themselves to even a slight degree. But also that there's this entire extended period of parenting that essentially gives the parent the ability to help mold and formulate their child. And the Talmud tells something very interesting. The Talmud says that every person, there's 3 partners that are in control of that person, that form the person. It's the parents, father, mother, and the Almighty. And I think this is, a microcosm really of life itself, in that we have a role to play. Parents that do a good job, that will be reflected in the child. And parents that don't do a good job, unfortunately, the child will exhibit that as well in their behavior. So it's really an entire arena where the parents' decisions, the parents' impact really matters. We are partners. We're at the table and we decide. Of course, the Almighty's there as well. The Almighty gives us life and gives us vitality and goodness, of course. But the parents really, with their ability to direct the child and to guide the child and to parent properly, they have a say whether the child grows and flourishes and develops really nicely, or unfortunately, if the child, is neglected, and the child's needs are neglected, and the child isn't given good guidelines for living, then the child will indeed suffer. But I think this is kind of one example, but really that's what life really is. Life is where we decide our future, but the Almighty also decides our future because we're partners. We spoke about this last week, where the evil eye means is that's a way of a person giving over what their position on a given matter is vis-a-vis another person. But as parents, we have an actual responsibility to parent. We can't just, if the child left alone is not going to develop properly. It's not going to happen. And we have a responsibility. And in fact, it's a mitzvah for us to parent. And the way the child is physiologically built, they need parenting. They can't develop properly without that. So for example, we're told right away there's mitzvahs that a parent has with a child. mitzvah, the first thing, of course, to circumcise a child, a boy, that would be, of course, to teach them Torah and to marry them off. So to me, this is very interesting. There's actually a mitzvah in the Torah for parents to marry off their child. Now, by the time people get married, how old are they? But to me, this is interesting because we think of parenting, it's generally maybe the first kind of 10 years or 15 years, but certainly not all the way to someone's marriage. They get married when they're 20 or 25 or 30. Then they're kind of away from their parents. It's possible, I have a theory, that maybe, indeed, the responsibility of parenting extends from birth or even before that until the child is actually on their own, like they're married and they have their own life. Someone once compared parenting as the parent's candle is touching the child's candle until the child's candle is lit on his own. It's kind of perpetuating this life and light onwards. And maybe until the child's married, they still need their parents. Maybe. But I would say that the influence, the capacity for a parent to influence and to kind of change the child is at its peak early on. Someone once said, I don't know, I haven't verified this, so I don't want to kind of attribute this idea, but someone said that we really have 6 years to get our kids on the right track. And then and that's really where we're establishing the fundamentals and the foundations of their life. I don't know if that's true or not, but that idea I think certainly is true. That once the relationship is developed, it becomes much harder to deal with a recalcitrant teenager who doesn't like his parents or his or her parents than it would be to make sure that there's a warm and loving and harmonious and friendly relationship early on, and then when the vicissitudes of teenagehood hit, then it's much easier if the parents already have established a very close and warm and friendly relationship. Additionally, we're told that a parent has to teach their child a trade. In fact, the Talmud says, if a parent does not teach a child how to make a living, how to have a livelihood, then it's as if they taught them to be a thief. What that means is that your responsibility to teach is not just to do good and not do harm. It's if you don't do good, you will do harm. The child's incomplete. If you don't fill the gaps and the voids, then by definition, you are ensuring that void will remain. If the child becomes a thief because dad didn't teach him how to make a decent living, who taught him how to be a thief? His parents, and his parents are responsible. A parent needs to teach a child how to swim. So this is an interesting one. This is all sourced in the Torah. How to swim. Why would a parent need to teach a child how to swim? It's nice, good exercise, the best kind of exercise, right? Survival. That's that, right? It's very likely at some point in the child's life that they will be in the swimming pool, or someone will shove them in the swimming pool, or they'll be they'll have to cross the river or whatever, and they need to know how to swim. And if they don't know how to swim, they may drown. But I think we can safely say that yes, while swimming is an area that they may need for survival, but that's because they need to know how to swim. The parent needs to teach a child how to swim. In our world, the parent needs to teach a child how to cross the road safely, right? Because children need to cross the road. It's going to happen. You have to teach a child how to do it. And parents need to teach their kids about how to manage with school. School's very unnatural for kids, at least my kids. It's not a natural setting for them. And it's challenging for them. And we kind of thrust our kids into school and we say, oh, thank God, we can go back to our life, right? Drop them off, and we have 8 hours of respite. But that's another area. But kids are growing up in a crazy world, and it's our responsibility to make sure that our kids are prepared for what they're going to face. It's a crazy world that we give we present our kids, and the kids now they have they could go online, and of course it's a very wonderful resource and a way for them to learn about the world. But it's full of the craziest people. We have a YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, right? So we do videos, right? We now we're moving to do a lot of Facebook stuff. But we have some YouTube videos, and I look at the comments. So we moderate the comments. The comments that we don't say such outrageous stuff. It's Torah stuff, right? I have this one video that I posted, why everyone hates the Jews. And you know what? He's right, because according to the FBI, in America, place where we live, 58% of hate crimes of religious nature are against Jews. This whole Islamophobia, it's a bunch of nonsense. There's no Islamophobia. There's Judeophobia, whatever you want to call it. Really, 58%, much more than Muslims or any other group. And that's in America. And that's, the most, I guess, progressive in this area of any country in history. But it's a fact. And you learn about Jewish history, it's clear that Jew hatred has been a constant in the past, for sure 1,000 years. So and that's a good question. So he asked the question, I gave an answer. And I have all the emails about just the uncensored emails of what people say online. And the most vile things that you won't imagine. You cannot in your life imagine what people say online. And that's just common. And we give our kids, say, okay, here's an iPad. Go learn about butterflies. And they learn, and that's good, and it's great. But it's terrifying. Send your innocent little children, and they go online, and who knows what they're going to meet, what they're going to say, and then what happens? You know how many Jewish kids today are anti-Zionist or anti-Israel? It's very common. Why? Because they're exposed to all that nonsense. And it's not like this is an area that education won't help. Like if parents would educate the child, okay, let's get to know the facts, what's real, what's fact, what's fiction, what's proper, what's ethical, what's moral, what's good. The kids will be prepared to deal with that. We just expose them to everything. Well, you have to open their mind. Of course you have to open their minds, but you don't have to fill it with all the sewage in the world. Mm-hmm. That's not a good thing. And the funny thing is, it's so asinine because Israel's the one liberal democracy in the craziest neighborhood in the world, and there's 500,000 dead Syrians, and no one cares. No one. But God forbid there's a checkpoint because people are pulling knives and stabbing people. God forbid. Oh no, right? It's insane. It's preposterous. And this should be the one area that for sure parents should be able to influence their children. But the world and all the voices are very powerful. We have the most powerful voice for our children, at least initially. But if we don't kind of take that microphone and utilize it, then the other voices will drown us out once it's too late. Okay, so that's the first one. Got a parent. Now, children are different. So that brings us to number 2, and that's you have to individualize your parenting. You can't, have a cookie-cutter solution for kids. And anyone who has 2 kids knows that anyone has 2 kids. You know that kids are different, right? Because you have, and everyone will say, well, it's amazing. My first kid, my second kid couldn't be any more different. And the truth is, every kid can't be any more different. I think the Almighty plays this nice trick on us that specifically the first and second kids are always the most different, to just impress upon us every kid's different, and what works for one might not work for the other. You have to tailor craft the parenting to the individual nature of the child. I know with me, some kids, they need a lot of cuddling and support and encouragement. Other ones, they just want to be on their own, and they just want to go out and run around, my philosophy is a little bit to go easy on the homework. Kids don't become geniuses in 3rd grade, and to have I think homework's outrageous. I know if you may disagree with me, sorry, but I think the kids have enough time in school and they need to play. I think playing is a big deal, but there's got to be consistency, right? If you're going to say you got to do your homework, if that's what you're going to pick your fight over, great, you picked the fight and good luck. You got to fight it. Or clean up your room or whatever. But whatever it is, there has to be consistency. So, and parents have to decide what's important, and you gotta stick to that, and that's an ideal, and that's important, and what's not important. Sure. And part of that is to individualize the parenting. You can't say what works for one kid is what works for other kids, because every kid's different. And in fact, there's a very famous verse that we read in Scripture. You have to educate the child as per their own way. And then, even when they get old, they will not deviate from it. And this teaches us really 2 things. Number 1, it teaches us that, how do you train? How do you educate a child, that's in his own way. But also, it tells us what the focus really is. And this brings us to number 3. You have to parent with a long-term view. What are you thinking when you're parenting a 6-year-old child or a 4-year-old child? So we were tempted to try to make the best situation right now. The kid has a penchant for doing something that makes his or her room messy. So you want to clean the room, of course, but you also want the child, when they're old, to be successful. That's your perspective. So you have this tension between immediate results and long-term results. And in fact, I think there's a famous psalm that King David wrote about the inauguration of the temple. And he calls it, the Hebrew word for inauguration of something, is the same word as education. And I was thinking that maybe it's not a coincidence, where when you want to build a house, so the bigger, more magnificent the house that you want to make, well, the longer the amount of time that the house is going to be under construction. And a house under construction, it doesn't really fill any of the responsibilities that a house ought to fill. It doesn't provide shelter, or you can't really live there. If you want immediate results, you can build a little tent and it's good now. But then harsher conditions, and that's not so impressive, We want to build wonderful, amazing, fantastic children. We have to realize it's a long process. And long process, of course, demands patience, but also demands that in every pedagogical decision that you make, what's your aim? And of course, we want immediate results, but oftentimes those decisions that will garner the best immediate results will have the worst long-term results. So for example, I think spanking children, I think it's probably the most effective way to get immediate results. If that's all that matters. If you spank the child, it's a very good way to get immediate results. I'm not trying to argue that parents should never spank their child and say the child as if he's the red heifer, you can't touch him, right? But some people utilize that. I think it was probably more common back in the day. They utilize it as a foundational, educational policy, and that I think is very, very harmful because, like I said, we're thinking about the long term. Children are like adults. If you have someone who gives you a nice shakedown, a verbal shakedown, even as adults, it's very jarring. For children, all the more so. So I think that there is an equivalent between screaming at a child and berating and castigating a child and spanking a child. I don't think it's any better because you're going to harm the child's self-esteem. And they're not going to like that because children, like adults, don't like pain. So the more pain that you heap on the child, the more you're going to have to pay for that pain. It comes at a cost. So there's a trade-off. Let's move on here. This we already kind of mentioned, but you have to love your children. I know that's probably self-understood, but you also have to tell them about it. Like that's really what the foundation of the relationship is. It's one of love. And that really is above all else. And also, like we mentioned before, like what is going to ensure that when the child becomes a teenager or an adult, that there still is an open channel of communication and there's still a very positive relationship. It's the love of their youth. So this is something that we mentioned a few times, it came up over here, that I think generally parents don't necessarily recognize the power that they have over their children. Because, like someone said, a few people mentioned this, that we really create their reality. Whatever you tell a child they are, that's what they are. And whatever you tell a child, like kind of the spin that you put on any circumstances that you have to interact with, that's going to be their circumstances. I had this example that I thought about recently. So we have a Shabbos table, right? So there's tons of stuff on the Shabbos table. The meal's over. Well, what happens with all the stuff, right? Kids got to help, right? So what do we say? You say, everyone's put back a minimum of 10 things. So first the kid may say no or not, but the kid agrees. Let's assume the kid agrees. Puts back 10 things. But when you present it like that, then the kid feels like, okay, I have this burden to put back 10 things. It's a burden, it's slavery. But what can I do, right? They pay for my they pay for my room and board. I gotta listen, or they threaten whatever sanctions. I gotta listen, and they do it. Wouldn't it be better for the spin to be on it that everyone, like, not to count 10 things. No, everyone, like, we're a family, we're working together. Like, let's do this together. Let's see how fast we can do this together. Or right, but present the positive spin, and thus they feel like helping and contributing. It's something that they want to do, and it's something that's rewarding. I was thinking kind of different aspects of this. So self-esteem, right? You want the child to feel good about themselves, and I think arguably this is maybe one of the most important things that a parent can give the child, is a feeling of purpose, of that they're valuable, that they're important, that they have the ability to do whatever they set their mind to. There is a negative to that, I think. And that is that sometimes we present that as abilities versus effort. We want to boost our child in a way that's not harmful for them. So, for example, you tell a child, you are so bright, you are so intelligent, you're so wicked smart. Is it good for a child to know that they're wicked smart? If they are, maybe. It's positive. They know it's a good quality. But I think it's also dangerous. Because remember, we're creating the world that the child lives in. The child lives in a world that they're very smart. What if they're not so smart? Well, then they feel like part of their internal, self-evaluation is crumbling. So what happens? Child thinks he's so smart. Parents told him he's so smart. Well, what happens now? He gets to school, and there's kids that are either maybe as smart or more capable or more bright, or he knows that he struggles at math, for example. So he's never an aversion for challenging him or herself in math, because if they fail, maybe they're not so smart after all. And that conflicts with their self-perception. So it's much better, it's much preferable to tell a child not that you're so capable and so gifted and so talented, and rather to kind of boost their growth mindset, to boost the fact that, what you can accomplish, and focus on accomplishments and not necessarily on abilities. Focus on action, not on potential. And I think there's a negative to this as well. Like, we tell kids that are things that are difficult to do. I know I have this myself. Like, there's certain volumes of the Talmud that, everyone knows, these are hard volumes. Oh, they're hard. But if they're hard, if you approach it, this is difficult material, then you might have a hard time actually. You'll have an aversion from doing that, because we don't want to do things that are too hard for us. Like, if this is quantum mechanics or whatever, something that's whoa, no, we're humans, we're very gifted, very capable. Let's take it on. Why are we so scared of all these things? The right mindset of tackling those things that are so difficult. How difficult are they really, right? There's a story about a guy in California, a university student, who apparently came late to a class. This is verified. He came late to a class, and he saw on the board 2 equations. A fellow by the name of George Danzig, his name is. He saw 2 equations on the board, and he assumed it was homework. So he went home, and he just did them. And it turns out these weren't quite unsolvable problems, but they were unproven statistical theorems. That because he's like, yeah, we've got to do this. He just assumed it was just homework. He just did it. And if he would have been told, and he himself said this in an interview, if he had been told, these are unsolved, it's impossible, no one's ever proven it, he wouldn't have done it. But how many things in life are there that, we're so scared of tackling because it's so hard? And if a parent is recognize that they are chiefly responsible in determining what a child thinks of themselves, and what a child thinks of the world. And I think also we don't really recognize the capacity that children have. We like to dumb things down, and that's, I think, sometimes a mistake. There was an educator in Israel that I know that he did an experiment. He took a certain volume of the Talmud that is so difficult, and he had a bunch of third graders, and he said, okay, I'm going to teach them, and they'll all know it. And he taught them, and they all know it. They all knew it, and they all got it, and it's not so hard. We create these artificial barriers for us to greatness by labeling things as being very difficult. Okay, so teaching by example. You have to teach by example. And children are more likely to adopt the way the parents behave than the way they instruct. But I think this extends certainly, as Jews, it's ever more important for us. We struggle as a nation, I would say, certainly in America, to try to infuse our children with the same values and the same relationship that we have with Judaism to them. And parents struggle a lot. I met someone this week. He's like, he's asking me, his son is not so interested in Judaism. His son's 17. Could someone teach them Hebrew? Could someone try to get them involved? And this is common. And I don't want to tell this guy, but I guarantee that if I were to ask him, okay, what was your level of enthusiasm in Judaism? And what did the kids see? And if we're not enthusiastic about our Judaism, it should not be a shock the kid is not enthusiastic about it either. And then when the kid goes off and says, I'm not interested in any of this stuff, okay, well, why are they saying that? Is it possible that maybe you have a say in that? Because the kid's going to reflect what the parents' attitude towards it was. So I think for another example, so you gave an example of conflicting messages. Yeah. But if we view our Torah, our Judaism as a chore, as a challenge, as a hassle, well, kids, like adults, want to avoid pain. And if Judaism is painful, they're going to find another alternative. As adults, we face it's difficult to be an adult. It's much harder to be an adult than to be a child, I think, in certain respect. You got to make a living, you got to deal with coworkers, you got to deal with bosses, you have to deal with bills and deadlines. It's very hard, right? You got to deal with kids, right? And it's very hard for us to have a side that we show our children that life is really so exciting. Life is exciting. It's so wonderful, and I'm so happy to be alive. But can we say that maybe is there anything more important than a child knowing how valuable and how wonderful the opportunity is to live and to just to be alive? How wonderful that is. But if we present a face of melancholy to our children, well, what lesson do they learn? We have to always be exciting and positive and upbeat and excited, and it's so wonderful, I'm so happy, let's dance on tables. And that attitude, I think, really will permeate to our children. Our kids need to know that life is positive. The difficulties that we face as parents in our own lives, that should not negatively affect our parenting, right? So if I'm depressed because of something that the kid's not responsible for, they shouldn't suffer. But if I say, listen, if I explain to my son that I'm so happy to be alive, I'm so joyous, but something very sad happened and that's why I'm sad, I think that's a very powerful lesson. Yeah. But if I'm just snappy with him because I'm upset at my boss, that's not fair to the child. Why should the fact that I'm upset at my boss cause me to be a bad parent? That's not fair. Now, if we are good role models as parents, so we teach by example, our kids will like to follow that. Now, there's a caveat to this. Why does being a good example, why does that positively affect the child? Yes, the reason is, if there's a healthy relationship between parents and children, it's a normal, happy, healthy, stable, harmonious home, children want to emulate the parents. But if the child does not like you, then in fact the opposite is true. All this is predicated on the child and you having a loving relationship. So a loving relationship, that ensures the child wants to be like you. And thus, when you behave in a certain way, they'll follow by example. But if the child hates you, then they'll want to be exactly the opposite of you. So you behaving properly will in fact have a negative consequence because they'll specifically want to spite you and do the exact opposite. So in fact, you're better off behaving terribly. Okay, what about discipline and confrontation? So this is, I would say, maybe one of the most debated areas of parenting. How much to discipline, how much to punish, or consequences, depends how you want to say that. I think certainly, passive-aggressive punishment is bad because you don't really accomplish anything. Where, you just ignore a child. It's very painful for a child when you ignore them, and I don't think you really accomplish that much. The golden rule is to have whatever standards you have. If you have a set of rules that are and you stick by them, then the child knows, like, these are rules and these are firm. If you make a threat, you have to live with that threat, and you have to uphold your side of because children are going to test you. So if you say, if you make a threat, you have to use it very sparingly, because there may come a time where the threat will have to be actualized, and you'll have to do it, or else you lose a little bit of your influence because child thinks, parents are a little bit wishy-washy, and whatever they say doesn't really mean what they say it means. Okay, so this brings us to number 8. We have to collaborate with our partners. I think maybe one thing that's very harmful for parenting is where the father and the mother aren't aligned in their aims for the child. Yeah. And if they have opposing ways of dealing with the child, that's more harmful than doing something that's bad, so to speak. At least they're both united. I would argue that having a very happy marriage is probably vital and critical for being a good parent. And you have to collaborate, which means to talk about your kids, to communicate about them, not about that exclusively. Like find other things to talk about as well. But certainly, you're in this together. You're partners, and you have to debate and discuss to see what's the best approach for every one of your children through every one of their challenges. But I said specifically partners because we have the Almighty. The Almighty is a partner in this. In fact, during the month of Elul that we're in right now, there's a tradition to read the 27th Psalm every day, twice. And there's one line there, a very powerful line, where King David writes that my father and my mother have abandoned me, but the Almighty has gathered me in. And this really goes back to what we said previously, is that there's 3 partners. And we cannot keep the Almighty out of his role that he has to play in parenting the child. So what does that mean? That means getting him involved. How do you get the Almighty involved in parenting? One word: prayer. Prayer is the way to include the Almighty in parenting. And by the way, who's the most skilled out of the 3 partners in parenting? Certainly the Almighty. The Almighty is a more skilled educator than even the best mother. Of course, because the Almighty knows who we are and what we are and what makes us tick, and how to make sure everything goes well, and how to guard the child from bad things, bad influences, and bad friends, and harmful things that are dangerous. You want to have the Almighty involved. And how do you do that? You do that by praying, of course. And every person who has responsibility, that has to be reflected in prayer as well. I think the idea of having 3 partners in man, I think it also extends to letting the kids know about that as well. Like, the kids know that, Daddy loves them, and Mommy loves them, and the Almighty loves them. But that's important for a kid to know, that there's this invisible player you can't see, but you can relate to, that's part of our family, so to speak. And that's a very powerful thing for a kid to know. We are a mixed bag, all of us, of good and bad character. And unfortunately, bad parenting is usually reflective of bad character. So if a parent's impatient, that will be reflected in the way they treat their child, because they want the child to be good now. They don't have to wait. And thus their impatience will cause them to be a bad parent. Of course, to be angry, so we think that, I'm a parent, I'm a pedagogue. I have to respond properly, with anger. No, it's very often just because we're angry people, or we have angry tendencies that we need to curb, and that's going to negatively influence our parenting if we allow that to interfere. So you see the neighbor's kid. The neighbor's kid just excels so respectful, yes ma'am, yes sir, excels in schoolwork, always neatly dressed, just nice, just so wonderful. And you're telling your kid, you're mentally kind of trying to grapple with the fact that the neighbor's kid is just so much more successful in every way than your own child. But what's that? That's pure envy. It's just straight up envy. It's just a terrible midah, terrible character. It's your own terrible character. And now you're going to let that off on your kid because you're envious of your neighbor. Or when the kid is misbehaving around other people, you're worried how people are going to judge you. You don't think about the kid's interest. You think about the other people, how are they going to judge you? And therefore, you're going to say, you get very angry at your kid. How are you speaking like this? I once had one of my kids. One of my little kids, we were in a pizza shop. And he was upset at something. And he screamed at the top of his lungs. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Shut up!" in this crowded pizza shop. And everyone's looking around. And I'm thinking, this is so embarrassing. I want to just curl over, right? But, this is a kid. He's going through a phase. And now I'm embarrassed. So I'm going to let that interfere so he has to suffer? So maybe there's an appropriate response. We don't talk like that. But I shouldn't respond only because I'm now embarrassed if I'm not going to respond otherwise. But really, in every arena of our parenting, there's going to be our own personal bad midos, our own personal bad character is going to make it hard for us to be good parents. There's this whole notion called Sar Didl Banim, which means the pain of raising children. It's difficult to raise children. It's not easy. I want to theorize that the reason why it's not easy is because to do it properly, the parent themselves has to perfect their own character. Because if you don't have good character, it's impossible to parent properly. Control, right? We like to be in control. And that, of course, we have the kid who's under our thumb. And the kid does things that are, that are in conflict with what we would like in our ideal world. And we say, I'm going to get control. I'm going to lock you up. You see parents that put kids on leashes as if they're dogs. You've seen that. You go to the mall, you see it all the time. There's a story my mom tells about me. When I was 7, I had a tendency to be a little bit precocious. Either way, I was that kid, and I would be a little bit of a terrorist in the neighborhood. And so there was this one frustrated mother that I might have gotten into some scuffle with her kid or whatever, and she ran and she knocked on the door and she said, "You have to put your kid on a leash." And my mother's like, "I'm sorry, he's not a dog. I'm sorry." That's what she said. But kids are crazy. By adult standards, they're crazy. And we need to feel like we're in control, and we can't be in control. But we could, but that's bad midos necessarily. If your kid's going to fall into the gorilla enclosure, then you have to find some way to avoid that. But generally, to say that we have to be in total control to telegraph what they do, that's lockdown. I felt this. I haven't done it, thankfully. I felt like I want to get a pair of handcuffs, handcuff the kid to his bed, and just have a little few moments of sanity. I really felt that, and that's bad midos. It's bad character. We have to realize that we're not in control. The kid is his own life. We have to try to do as much as we can to help. But especially at the stages that they are, when they're totally, you can talk to them for whatever reason.
They're unruly.
Exactly, or whatever. They're hyper. And that's just the way it is, and you have to just bear it. And that's why it's painful to raise kids, because you have to bear it. And lastly, this is a little bit of a different fly. That's the fly in the window syndrome. Sometimes you see the fly that is so positive that there's, they see a clear window, and every time they try to fly through it, they hit something invisible. Sometimes we don't know what's stunting the progress of our kids or our parenting methods. Something's not working, and it's harmful for the child, harmful for the parent. And sometimes it's just, you have to just wait it out. And sometimes maybe, I may be talking from personal experience here, but sometimes maybe the school is trying to see more immediate results, and you want to have a little bit more patience, let the kid kind of get through childhood. But sometimes, like, there's something that's just, it's not working, and you try the same tactics over and over again, and they don't work. And we have a tendency to just kind of get into a certain mode of behavior that we're so sure is correct, either because we thought about it, that's what we concluded, or that's just what we just are doing, and we just do it, and we want to be principled. Or we don't want to address it, but if it's not working, you have to reconsider, and thou shalt not be obstinate. And try something else. Try something else. So certain kids, they need a pet, whether it be a goldfish or a frog. Like my kids like my kids love, like, I have one kid that loves like touching worms and frogs and those kinds of things. Just no fear of any of those stuff, and like, would catch a spider and like, I don't know where he gets it from, but like that's his thing, But I think there is this tendency that we have to get into a certain zone, a certain mode, and to stick with it no matter what. And what did Einstein say? The definition of insanity is trying something again and again, and you try to get different results, expect different results. We have to realize sometimes they don't work, and we have to change our tactics, and that's why parenting is not an easy job. Just like thinking about this is valuable. Like, regardless of whether or not we integrate any of these practices into parenting or how it extends to trying to train ourselves, just the thought of the fact that as parents, as educators, as leaders, and as really people who are trying to change ourselves, to just have a convention, a discussion about it is on its own valuable, because it gets you into the thought process of even trying to address it or to approach it and to think about it, to strategize and come up with ideas and tactics that may or may not work. But either way, to be a mindful parent is better than to just be someone who just does reactionary, habitual parent and just never really pay much attention to what they're doing. So just quickly, I want to just read off the Ten Commandments, what I think are the Ten Commandments of parenting. Maybe we have to add or subtract a few of them, or converge some of them. But number one, thou shalt parent. You have to parent. You can't just expect it to happen on its own. It's part of your job. You're a partner, right? You have to do your responsibility as a parent. You have to individualize. Thou shalt individualize your parenting. Every child's different. They need to be treated differently. Thou shalt parent with a long-term view. We want immediate results. With kids, you can't get optimal immediate results without losing, without compromising long-term results. Thou shalt love your child and express it. This is self-evident, right? That's the foundational relationship between parents and child. Thou shalt boost the child's esteem, self-esteem, which is a way of saying you are the one who is in charge of framing their child, their life perspective about themselves and about the world around them. It's a very powerful weapon or tool in your arsenal. Make sure you use it properly. Thou shalt teach by example. Right? Bless you. If we want our kids to be enthusiastic about something, well, if we're enthusiastic, it's likely that they'll be enthusiastic about it. If they like us, then it's likely they'll want to emulate us. Maybe not in vocation, but maybe in behavior, in the way they treat their own children, etc. Thou shalt discipline and demand with consistency. That's the most important thing above all. The kid knows that when you say something, it matters, both for the good and for the bad. Don't demand too much about them. You're not trying to create a perfect child quite yet. There's a process of development and sprouting that is necessarily going to happen along with time. The efforts that you invest now will pay fruit down the line. Thou shalt collaborate with your partners. Right? You're not on your own. You're not on your own. You have your spouse. You have even the school, I would say, to a lesser extent. But certainly the Almighty. We oftentimes forget about Him. But A, introducing the child to it, and B, praying. Right? Getting the Almighty involved in parenting is very, very important. Thou shalt not make your parenting an arena for your own negative character traits. Our negative character traits really express themselves with regards to our parenting. Every bad midah that we could possibly have will interfere with our parenting. If we're great people that have good midos, then when the kid misbehaves in front of other people, it won't bother us as much because other people will judge us. Okay, sometimes people judge us, and we have to just deal with it. We're parents. And lastly, thou shalt not be obstinate. Don't be that fly in the window that is so committed and married to one way, even if it doesn't work, and just ride it into oblivion.